taxi for now. We had the plague and they didn't learn about the plague in Manila. That part of it, what people say comes from tax illegal tax disposal. It without, without infrastructure, without ability to be able to organize all you have to get it's become a race against so really what we need is to have these kind of regulations that will indeed, ensure that taxation returns to the U.S., ensure that people have the right to organize, ensure that people have the right to housing, all of those things which, workers need as an infrastructure.
I lived up in Trinidad a lot during the 1970s and early 1980s, and I always used to come up here and take a look at this tombstone, and I found these words down here, "murdered by capitalism," and they really they always set me off on a search as to who E.B. Schnaubelt was and how he got here. And I'm writing a book on it now, so I picked up a lot more information and been able to draw a kind of narrative of E.B. Schnaubelt and where he came from and what kind of background he came out of, which I think is real important to understand because it is very much related to the U.S. labor movement and to this day that we're celebrating today, May 1st, International Working Men and Women's Day. The Schnaubelt family comes from Germany. They were involved in the Paris Commune of 1872, which spread all across Europe. It was not only in Paris, it was a workers' movement that spread all throughout Europe. Many workers were killed and many workers emigrated to the U.S., the most radical workers. Not only Germans, but Austrians and people from all over Europe who had been involved in the Paris communes. And the Schnaubelt family reassembled in Chicago in the mid-1870s. And the 1870s were a tumultuous time for labor. It was just being born in the factories and sweatshops of Chicago. And probably the highlight of those years was the Great Strike of 1877. It was a railroad strike. Began on the railroads, but it became a general strike all throughout Chicago. The troops were called out, many workers were killed, but it was actually the germination of the American workers' movement. Chicago, 1870s. Began a struggle for the 8-hour day. People worked essentially 12, 14, as long as the boss wanted you to work, you worked, for as little as he wanted to pay you. There were no organized unions. There was no way of the workers being able to defend their class and defend their working conditions. No, the 8-hour day seemed to be the demand that most made sense to working people. No? And little by little, the 8-hour day became the focus of the struggle for working people, particularly through a group, the predecessor of what is now the AFL-CIO. The Knights of Labor. Knights of Labor were largely Irish people, but as the struggle for the 8-hour day began to grow, suddenly the number of workers, members on the books of the Knights of Labor grew from 70,000 to 700,000 between 1885 and 1886 as the movement began to grow. And it drew immigrant workers, and most of the workers were immigrants, from all over the Midwest, not only from Chicago, but all over the Midwest. And when it appeared that the movement was strong enough to actually declare a general strike, that strike was set for May 1st, 1886. A march was held in Chicago, up Michigan Avenue. 100,000 people marched up Michigan Avenue in the first May Day. That holiday, that struggle for the 8-hour day was born right here in the U.S., where we don't celebrate it any longer, where it's been erased from collective memory. Now, at the same time, there was a strike going on at the McCormick Reaper factory. Cyrus McCormick, he was, one of the first great billionaire, and he had fired all his workers, and every single day the workers would come out and they'd battle the Pinkertons and the Scabs, who had replaced them, who had taken their jobs away. In 2 days after this first May Day, there was a confrontation between the police and the strikers, and 6 workers were killed. And one of the persons that had been there, who was a speaker up on the wagon during a meeting outside the McCormick factory, was a German anarchist named August Spies. He ran a newspaper called the Arbiter Zeitung. And he went back to the office and he put out a leaflet calling for revenge. It's called the Revenge Circular, in which he said working people should arm themselves and go to the Haymarket Plaza the next night for a meeting. Actually, not a lot of those leaflets got passed out. I think Spies thought better of it, withdrew it, and kind of toned down the language, but some of those bulletins did get into the hands of workers. Next night, there was a meeting held. Haymarket was a place where it was a Haymarket on De Plain Street in near the Chicago River, working class area, and there weren't a lot of workers there. There were probably 1,000 people in all. And it began to rain, and a lot of people went away, and as the crowd began to disperse, the police came and began to beat people into the sidewalk, and right around dusk a bomb was thrown, either by the police or by the anarchists. Historians seem to think it was the anarchists. There was a very militant core group amongst anarchist workers in Chicago who believed in what was called propaganda of the deed, of actually doing something, rather than writing words, no? The bomb went off. It kills one police officer, and the police open fire, and then the police kill 6 other police officers, and they also kill 7 workers. So it's kind of 7 to 7, you know. But all of the people who were subsequently indicted for the Haymarket riot, police riot, were not there. Some had been there and had gone, but they were indicted because they allegedly incited the riot, on conspiracy charges. It is said from the very beginning that Eddie Schnaubelt's brother, Rudolf Schnaubelt, was the man that made the bomb and threw the bomb at Haymarket. And it's an historical opinion. I was just reading the autobiography of Mother Jones yesterday, and she pins it on Rudolf Schnaubelt. On the other hand, anarchist historians like Paul Ehrlich, Franklin Rosemont say it was a sham basically perpetrated by a book that was written in 1906 by an English yellow journalist named Frank Harris called The Bomb, in which Rudolf Schnaubelt is the central figure, and he talks all about how he threw the bomb. And that's basically what's perpetuated the lie that Schnaubelt threw the bomb. Schnaubelt escaped, went to Canada, went to England, and wound up in Argentina. The Schnaubelt family was very connected to the Haymarket martyrs. One of the sisters, Maria, was married to Michael Schwab, who was one of the 8 Haymarket defendants. They were in the inner group of those people that were eventually hung for Haymarket. 4 out of the 8 people were hung. One of the defendants committed suicide, blew himself up in his cell. Became this great cause. The labor movement organized defense committees, had huge marches, but they couldn't turn back the tide of justice. And the Haymarket martyrs were hung November 11th, 1887. The Schnaubelt family then migrated from Chicago, came out here. Rebecca, the mother, died. They were all involved in the labor movement. They came out here, and Eddie first went up to the Klamath and homesteaded on the Klamath, came down to Arcata and bought a lot, or leased a lot, from Brizard, who was the main, the owner of it all here, Mr. Big, And out here by Big Lagoon, right where the Big Lagoon Lumber Corporation was for a while, Timber Corporation, and he did pretty well. He was a machinist, so he made all the machines, handmade them all, handmade the belts, the saws. He did all of this stuff. It was his life was into this, and he organized his neighbors into a co-op, and they set up the shingle mill, and they went to work. And they did pretty good, but then 1907, 1908 was a Great Depression, resource depression, and the wood prices dropped, and he went out of business. The workers took off and went looking for other work. The co-op fell apart, and Brizard forecloses on Eddie Schnaubelt and says, "You haven't paid me the rent for this year, so all this stuff is mine." And the litigation goes on for a couple of years, and in fact goes on for 4 years. And finally, the word is out that Brizard has sold the mill. It's still out there by Big Lagoon to a guy down in Freshwater. And Eddie Schnaubelt hears about this and says, they're not going to take my mill. You know, I built this with my own sweat and blood. And he grabs his kid. He's got 5 kids. They're living in town here. And they go walking out there on a moonless night, May 22nd, as we can see here, 1913. He's got his wrenches. They walk up to the mill. He posts the kids around as kind of lookouts. And then he makes a mistake at just dropping his bag of wrenches on the ground and wakes up the watchman. The watchman comes, and as he later tells the inquest, I heard that he was an anarchist, so I had to defend myself and shoots him twice. And so the body is there all night. The kids and the wife, Tina, come back the next day, and they bury it up here, but there's no headstone, no? And then litigation goes on for a couple of more years. And one of the stories is that her lawyer was poisoned. And another story is that Brizard bought off one of the lawyers. And finally in 1915, she's so disgusted with the, with what has come down here that, the Arcadia Union says, after years of tumult and litigation, she finally brings somebody up here to, inscribe their name inscribe the phrase "murdered by capitalism" on his tombstone, and leaves town in disgust. So that's how Eddie Schnaubelt got here.
What a story!
Yeah, it's a great story.
Yeah. And it's it's really it happened so long ago that the town of Trinidad has no connection to it any longer. It's just, it's nothing, it doesn't really come out of local history. And I would be interested to find out if it's been excised, how exactly they dealt with it. I went through all the Arcadia Unions for a number of years from 1912 through 1914 to see what kind of repercussions and there isn't a whole lot.
What about the museum then? Is there nothing in the museum?
I haven't seen anything in the museum either.
I think there might be some old pictures of the mill or something.
Yeah.
What did Ned say? Did Ned tell you anything?
Well, he's the archivist, the cemetery. So he's been in touch with the family, and Ned was actually able to put me in touch with the family.
Oh, good.
So,
where do they live?
Mostly in the Central Valley. Lodi is the one granddaughter that still is able to communicate. Some of them are real old. Lives down in Lodi, and she was able to give me a lot of information about where the family had come from.